So today, we're going to dive into something that's basically the invisible architecture of our entire world, and that is contract law. It's this powerful set of rules that governs pretty much every agreement we make, from something tiny to a deal that changes everything. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let me start by asking you a question. What on earth could your morning coffee run possibly have in common with launching a multi-million-dollar satellite into space? I mean, the scale is completely different, the stakes are worlds apart, so what's the thread that connects them?
And there it is. Yep, both of those things, and honestly, millions of other things we do every single day, are powered by legally binding promises. You see, contract law is the quiet, powerful engine running in the background of our lives, making sure that when we make a deal, it actually means something.
So how does one of these promises actually come to life? How does an agreement go from just words to something the law will back up? Well, it's not as complex as you might think. We're going to start right at the beginning and look at the two magic ingredients every contract needs.
It really all boils down to a simple two-step dance. First, one person has to make a clear, definite proposal. That's the offer. Then, the other person has to agree to that exact proposal without changing a single thing. That's what we call an unqualified acceptance. When you get those two things together, boom, you have the spark of a contract.
But here's where it gets interesting. An offer can come in two very different flavors. It can be specific, like a company offering you a job that's just for you. Or it can be a general offer made out to the public, to anyone and everyone. And this is where contract law gets really, really cool.
Let me tell you a story. Meet the Carbolic Smokeball Company. A long time ago, they put this ad in the newspaper, and they made a really bold promise. They said their product could prevent the flu, and they offered a £100 reward, which was a ton of money back then, to anyone who used it just like they said and still got sick.
Well, along comes a woman named Mrs. Carlo. She sees the ad, she buys the smoke ball, she uses it exactly like the instructions say, and you can probably guess what happened next. She got the flu. So naturally, she went to the company and asked for her £100. And the company, they basically told her to get lost.
So this all ends up in court, and it's just a perfect example of how a general offer works. The court's ruling was a game changer. They said that ad wasn't just some marketing puff piece. It was a serious offer made to the whole world. And Mrs. Carlisle, she accepted that offer, not by writing a letter, but with her actions, by actually using the smoke ball. The company had made a binding promise, and you better believe they had to pay up.
Now, this whole story highlights something so important. Your acceptance has to be a perfect mirror of the offer. Think of it like two puzzle pieces that have to click together perfectly. If you try to change the deal at all, like saying, okay, I accept, but can I pay you next month, the pieces don't fit anymore. You haven't actually accepted the deal. What you've just done is made a brand new counter-offer, and you've basically just hit the ball back into their court.
Okay, so we've got our offer, we've got our acceptance. We're done, right? Well, not quite. To make a promise legally binding, to give it real teeth, we need one more absolutely crucial ingredient. We need the price of the promise.
The fancy legal word for this is consideration, but don't let that intimidate you. All it means is the value that each person is bringing to the deal. It's the something for something that proves it's a two-way street. And what's really important to remember is that this something does not have to be money. It could be a service, a good, or even a promise to not do something.
And here's a fact about contract law that kind of blows people's minds. The courts do not care if you got a good deal. They're not your parent checking to see if you paid a fair price. The only thing they want to know is, was there some exchange of value? As long as both sides gave up something real, the law almost never steps in to ask if it was a fair price. It's all about freedom of contract.
I mean, just look at this wild example. You could have a totally legal, binding contract to sell a house worth 1 crore rupees for just 1 lakh. Now, is that a smart deal? Oh, heck no. But is it a valid contract? As long as everyone agreed to it freely, the law says, yep, it sure is. Of course, in the real world, not all promises are kept. So what happens when somebody doesn't hold up their end of the bargain? This brings us to the messy part of the contract life cycle, the breakup.
The road to a broken contract is actually pretty simple. First, you need a valid contract. One with our magic ingredients: offer, acceptance, and consideration. Then, one person just fails to do what they promised to do. And that failure, that's what we call a breach of contract.
But it's worth pointing out that some agreements were never real contracts to begin with. The law is not going to enforce a promise to do something illegal, like committing a crime, or something that's literally impossible, like, I don't know, building a bridge to the moon. Those kinds of agreements are just void right from the start.
Okay, so a promise has been broken, things have gone wrong. How does the law step in to clean up the mess? Well, this is where we get into the legal toolkits designed to fix the situation. These are called remedies.
Think of a remedy as the law's way of trying to make the person who got hurt whole again. And while there are a few different tools in the box, the one you'll see most often is damages, and that's just a fancy legal term for money. The whole goal is to put the wronged person back in the financial spot they would have been in if the promise hadn't been broken in the first place.
Now, this money can come in a few different flavors. First up, you've got ordinary damages, which cover the direct, predictable losses that happen from the breach. Then, there are special damages, and these are for unique losses that both people knew about when they made the deal. In some really rare situations, a court might award vindictive damages to punish someone for causing serious emotional harm, like in a breach of a promise to marry. And finally, there's a cool Latin phrase, quantum meruit, which just means as much as is earned. It's a way to make sure you get paid for the work you've already done.
That idea of special damages, it's a really big deal. It all comes down to what was foreseeable. If you're told, hey, if you don't deliver these machine parts on time, my entire factory will shut down and I'll lose a massive client, and you still take the deal, well, now you're on the hook for those huge specific losses if you fail. You can't say you weren't warned.
Okay, so we've journeyed through the birth, the life, and even the death of a legal promise. But let's zoom out. Why does any of this really matter in the grand scheme of things?
At the end of the day, contract law is the bedrock of trust. It is the invisible operating system that lets us do business with strangers, hire people we've just met, and rely on the promises other people make. Without this framework of certainty, our entire modern economy would just grind to a halt.
So, as you go about the rest of your day, whether you're buying that coffee, hopping on a bus, or clicking I agree on some website, just take a second to think about the invisible web of promises you're constantly interacting with. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What unseen contract will you enter into today?